the rocks. Then pumps inject bentonite, a liquid clay and cement mixture, into a trench in the middle of the cofferdam. The bentonite takes a few days to dry out. Eventually, it hardens into a substance strong enough to form a backbone, which will hopefully prevent the cofferdam's collapse. When the liquid sets, it will remain flexible enough to prevent the structure from cracking under pressure. When the cofferdams are completed and made safe, the water trapped between them is pumped out. The riverbed will then be dry and work can start on the dam's central section. The workers have to race against time and the weather to shore up the cofferdams and make them secure. The scale of this giant undertaking is formidable. If a flash flood were to occur at this stage, the cofferdam would collapse and send a huge tidal wave down the Yangtze, overwhelming everything in its path. China continued to test the limits of engineering as the main dam wall began to take shape in 1997. Dozens of giant cranes took over the work of pouring concrete. 350 buckets of cement, each weighing 20 tons, are lifted into the main dam wall every 24 hours. The proportions used in mixing the cement must be determined scientifically, as local climatic conditions affect the drying rate. It takes 5 minutes to swing each giant bucket across the void to the top of the dam. Once there, it is tipped into a pre-formed casing, where it hardens into a block. One small piece of the dam falls into place. On this site, women as well as men are employed in some of the most skilled jobs, including crane operating. These are the largest cranes in the world. Operators have to take an elevator and then climb 400 feet just to get to work every day. As the operator swings the enormous bucket of concrete, engineers below indicate the exact spot where it should be poured.
Since September last year, we've been operating right up here at this height. It's much higher than before, but it honestly doesn't scare me too much. To tell you the truth, once you get used to it, the actual height doesn't bother me. It's all the same to me. Just a moment. I have to give it my full attention. It's really complicated up here. There are other cranes around, and you have to be very careful to avoid collisions.
Like most of her co-workers, Feng Tse Huai and her family will live amid the noise and dirt of the construction site until the dam is complete. But it's not just the workers who have endured the brunt of the dam's construction. Officially, 1.2 million Chinese people are being driven from their homes over the course of the project. When the Three Gorges Dam is complete, the water level will rise behind it to over 500 feet, creating a reservoir nearly 400 miles long, where once there were thriving river communities. The biggest worry for all those involved is not the technical challenge, but the fate of the million or so people who live along the shores of the Yangtze between the dam and Chongqing. All these communities along the riverbanks will have to be moved.
The biggest problem is resettlement of people who live in the reservoir area. With the Three Gorges Dam, we can protect the people in the lower reaches, some 15 million people. But it will cause problems for the people in the upper reaches, which will be submerged. Currently, that is about 840,000 people. By the time the dam is completed, by natural increase, this will have become 1.13 million.
The water started to rise when the river was blocked off in 2003. The reservoir will be completely full by the year 2009. 2 major cities, 140 towns, 1,350 villages, and nearly 100,000 acres of farmland will disappear. In 2004, the reservoir was longer than the Grand Canyon. The people whose lives have changed the most are not the city dwellers, but those who have lived along the fertile banks of the Yangtze for generations.
The impacts of being resettled on a community are enormous. I think it's hard for anyone to really understand what it's like to have your entire community and culture displaced. And if you are displaced by a dam, it is probably the worst thing that could happen to you, almost. Your entire culture, your history is gone.
In some villages, the past survives in name only. As late as 1999, walking through Yinyang was like traveling back in time. Women spun yarn as they had for centuries. The miller ground winter corn and summer rice on the same millstones used by his grandfather and great-grandfather. Housewives cooked with the traditional wok. The village was almost self-sufficient, producing its own food, making its own clothes. The streets had never heard the sound of motorized traffic. It was a unique way of life. Through self-sufficiency, the village survived centuries of turmoil. This is where the ancient village tree stood for centuries. This was time-hallowed ground that had to be abandoned forever. In 2001, the village was moved up to Yinyang New Town, a government settlement built 500 yards up the hill. Here, the villagers will have to start again without any reminders of their past. The miller and his wife have a new house with luxuries like running water. But many people complain that they miss the sense of community they once enjoyed in their ancient village. Signs indicating the height of the rising water levels still pepper the Three Gorges area. This was the bridge in 1994. When the dam is finally complete, even the top of the bridge will be underwater. Construction continues at a relentless pace. Nearly 30 million cubic meters of concrete will be poured. The walls stand over 600 feet high. They are thick enough to withstand a conventional missile attack. Over 40,000 workers rotate in 24-hour shifts in a struggle to meet the Chinese government's ambitious deadline. But in April 2002, construction stopped immediately. Engineers discovered cracks on the face of the Three Gorges Dam.
They claim that the materials they use may not have been the best for the past 2-3 years. when they use it to pour the concrete on the dam site.
Robin Charlwood is a world expert on large dams.
Building a dam of this type with such a large mass of concrete, you place the cement and the water and the aggregate and create a chemical reaction to make the concrete. But in the course of that chemical reaction generates heat. And so the inside of this structure would expand, whereas the outside will be cooler and won't. And so what happens in all concrete dams like this is you get a tendency for cracking on the skin.
When the cracks appeared, the Chinese government turned to him for an independent analysis.
The cracks were just surface cracks. They were less than 1 millimeter wide and 3 meters deep. And they would only go in so far and then they will stop.
Assistant General Manager Chao Guanjing agrees.
It is safe under any conditions. I think we can protect. The design standard is according to the most unfavorable conditions.
Even though cracks continue to be found along the length of the dam's face, the building of the main wall continues. In 2002, hundreds of ships still passed through the dam's diversion channel on a daily basis. The commerce and tourism industry of the Yangtze is too vital to be stopped, not even for the construction of the dam. Captain Tan is typical of most Chinese riverboat captains. In 1999, we joined him on his final voyage through the gorges as he has known them. As skipper of the White Swan, he spent almost half a century on the river and is about to retire. When only 16 years old, Tan first sailed through the gorges as a crewman. On that trip, his boat was dashed to pieces. 17 steamships met their end here between 1900 and 1945. The swift currents and large boulders destroyed many vessels.
In order to be safe, you must know the riverbed, the size of the boat, and the water level. And you must know if the boat can go through the channel. If you don't consider all those factors, life will be lost.
Captain Tan is heading toward the City of Ghosts, a temple overlooking the port of Fangdu. This is one of the most important religious sites not only along the Yangtze, but in all of China. It's haunted with Buddhist demons and devils. Their mission is the endless punishment of human sinners. According to legend, the tortures that awaited the wicked in hell were reported by inmates who were allowed to return to life. Their horrifying vignettes are housed in a series of temples constructed about 14 centuries ago. The City of Ghosts will survive the flood. But in 2009, the entire port city of Fangdu will be underwater. Only one building will survive high above the hill, the ghost temple that for centuries safeguarded the city. By 2004, the former port had truly become a city of the dead. Most of the inhabitants were moving to a new town built across the river. But for all its doom and gloom, some locals believe the temple has brought them good fortune.
This is the government's policy. My friends and relatives are still here. The new city is only across the river from here. It is not far away. The new city is good, of course, The houses are modern. These are all old houses.
David Lee was born on the Yangtze, close to Fangdu. He was a river guide for 16 years. Now he's come back to witness the city's final days.
It's very good, very happy for little kids or young people to be relocated because they're going to have better living condition, better education, and better opportunities, job opportunities. But for those people in their golden age, probably they prefer to stay. I worry about those people.
Meanwhile, surrounding cities and villages like Dachang braced themselves for the waters that began to rise in 2003. Dachang was one of China's best preserved Ming Dynasty towns. This was Dachang in 1997, before the waters came. Villagers had just received word they would have to move. This was Dachang 8 years later. Already the water had risen 20 feet. Half the town had been demolished. Only a handful of villagers remain. August 2003, a milestone in human achievement. After 8 years of continuous work by 250,000 people, the main wall of the Three Gorges Dam is completed. It towers 607 feet and stretches for over a mile. The diversion channel is filled and all river traffic comes to a halt for the first time in 3,000 years. And now, instead of a smoothly flowing river, ships face a 600-foot wall. So how will they cross the dam? By passing through the largest set of locks in the world. It took 6 years of blasting to make room for these giant passageways. 10 huge holes were gouged out of the earth from solid granite. After 8 years of construction, the holes were transformed into the shipping locks stretching out over 4 miles. The Three Gorges locks are a double system, one for upstream traffic and the other for downstream. Construction was complex, but the concept is simple. Water flows into a series of holding tanks. Once sealed, they can raise or lower a ship up to 100 feet per lock. The locks can accommodate a ship weighing up to 10,000 tons. All the locks are controlled by engineers from the navigation control room. Our team was one of the first Western film crews to gain access to this highly secure room. Like air traffic controllers, these technicians coordinate every movement of every ship through every lock.
10号续人就行了啊。车空803。
好嘞，你看到我的噻。
After the ship enters the first lock, the controllers close the 800-ton doors. With the push of a button, 300,000 gallons of water fill the lock at 100 gallons per second. It takes almost an hour to fill each lock. 5 locks and 4 hours later, the ship exits the final set of doors and continues its journey down the Yangtze. The Three Gorges project has been a boon for large ship commerce. But it may sink a way of life that stretches back 4,000 years. Until work began on the dam, there were no roads connecting the Three Gorges. For local villagers, the only way to move goods and people was by small, handmade boats. On the Daning River, a boat traders cooperative lands with a cargo of pigs at a waterside village. By time-honored tradition, the villagers feed the boatmen before they return to their sampans. This sharing of bounty reflects the culture of a people grateful for the river that binds them together. Boatmen learn to run the river as soon as they're old enough to walk. Villagers learn to work the land and reap a rich harvest of rice, corn, and vegetables. Reliance on each other forged a bond that has endured for centuries. But as the Yangtze rises behind the Three Gorges Dam, these low-lying villages are disappearing, along with the customs that mark each one. By 2004, the water behind the dam had risen 500 feet. And for the first time, the Great Yangtze River was not only navigable, but safely so for large ships. Riverboat Captain Tan and his generation are a living testimony to the triumphs and tragedies of life on the Yangtze. Surveying the shore from his pilot house, he summons the memory of a time when danger lurked around every bend and death was commonplace. Here along the rocky edge of the river, an army of men and boys called trackers lived and died. Until the 1940s, when boats were powered by their own steam, vessels weighing as much as 120 tons were pulled upriver by human muscle.
The river flowed fast, and the path was narrow. If you fell, you died.
Hitched to lines made of bamboo, straining with bent backs, their fingers almost touched the ground. As they pulled, they sang to ease the pain. A troupe of singers, many former trackers, still perform the songs of their youth. One in 20 boats were destroyed, but no one knows how many trackers were pulled to their deaths. The only monument to their sacrifice, the shore, has vanished with the coming floods. Today, the only remaining trackers pull tourists upstream. Captain Tan makes his way upstream toward the magnificent temple called Shibozai, or Stone Precious Temple. Over 180 feet high, it's the tallest wooden structure in China, built during the Ming Dynasty in the 14th century. The most breathtaking feature is the view from its towering pagoda, Located on a rocky outcrop, the pagoda's internal staircase winds upward for 12 stories. The builders used no nails. The structure was lashed into holes carved into the cliff face. At the summit of the pagoda is a Buddhist temple active until the Cultural Revolution in 1966. Everything below the temple will be underwater in 2009. But officials hope to rescue the complex with an ambitious project. To save it, plans have been drawn to build a massive wall around the base of the pagoda. If they are successful, the structure will become a virtual island within the Three Gorges Reservoir. In 2002, the ancient village that once surrounded the temple was demolished in preparation for the rising waters and the final wall. "80 miles downriver, engineers have overcome another monumental challenge. In 1997, the ancient temple of Zhongfei was due to be inundated by the rising Yangtze. This figure indicates the height of the water by 2003. The temple commemorates Zhongfei, a heroic general from the 2nd century. He helped purge the land of corruption, but was ultimately murdered by his own treasonous officers. In the 1960s, Chairman Mao's Red Guards ransacked some of China's most sacred places. Not only was Zhongfei's temple threatened, but also its collection of some of the greatest calligraphy of the Yangtze Valley.
Such historical treasures suffered damages and destruction during the Cultural Revolution. So to save these cultural relics, intellectuals here wrote Chairman Mao's quotations on the reverse sides.
No Red Guard would dare destroy the thoughts of Mao, so the priceless tablets of Zhongfei Temple survived. In the face of a new threat, a far more audacious plan was conceived. In 2002, engineers carefully deconstructed the temple and moved it to higher ground 7 miles away. There was only one road to transport materials between locations. In 2003, the new Zhongfei Temple was open to the public. Locals are pleased with the effort. Now they can enjoy views of the temple from their new homes across the river. Today, workers are putting the final touches on the outer walls that will surround the structure. But for every temple saved, many more will be lost.